In today's video, I want to talk a bit about composition and which influence using a low point of view can have on it. I show you some examples where moving the camera closer to the ground helped me to create dynamic perspectives and reveal patterns which, had I shot from normal eye level, would have looked quite uninteresting. But I'll also talk about what to be aware of in terms of composition when photographing close to the ground. Although shooting low to the ground can have great effects on a photo, it can also lead to less pleasing results. But let's start with some examples where going low with the camera was helpful. I'll start with a few photos I took at the Grobbrach River in the German Black Forest. This photo here, this was shot at eye level and looks quite nice. It's the view you'll have when walking along the river. But it also looks ordinary, and had there not been this nice atmosphere created by the rain, it would have been quite a boring photo. So now let's compare this to the photo where I got down into the water and closer to the ground with the camera. The rock in the foreground here is the same one as in the other photo. It's basically this one here. So I just moved closer to it, and by using a wide-angle lens I now have a more dynamic composition with the water flowing into the frame diagonally, and the rock now serves as kind of an anchor point for the viewer around which the eye can travel. One thing to note here is that one can follow the flow of the water around the rock, and there's still some separation to the background here. Had I gone even further down with the camera, I would have lost this middle ground and the resulting photo would have lost much of its depth. So one important thing to keep in mind when working with such low perspectives is not to sacrifice the middle ground. Especially when shooting rivers, I find it much more pleasing in a photo if I can follow the flow of the river through the photo a bit, like here in this case. So here's another photo where I moved the camera close to a foreground rock, but still kept enough distance and elevation to not have this rock melt into the background. Again, there's a clear separation around the rock, and I can follow the flow of the water around it. Also, I have some repetition in the middle ground here, with the rocks appearing like stepping stones for the viewer to travel through the frame here. I applied the same principle to this photo of Praia da Draga. The low perspective created some nice dynamic, and the flow of the water in the foreground kind of pulls the viewer into the frame. But despite the low point of view, there's still enough room in the middle ground to create some visual flow here. If there's not much in the foreground and you don't have any rocks to anchor the composition, going low can sometimes reveal structures and patterns which provide the necessary foreground interest. This worked very well for this photo of Sala de Uyuni, where I went low to the ground to photograph the salt structures. But again, I made sure not to go too low and to still have the repetition of the patterns throughout the middle ground. Here you see a photo which shows my camera setup for that evening. The camera was roughly at knee height and I was shooting directly into the sun, which creates this nice glow in the salt structures of the photo. And as comparison, here's a photo of those structures shot around noon from eye level. You see how much the right perspective, and in this case also the right light, can improve the look of a photo. Because normally those structures don't look that spectacular. Even the right light alone would not have helped. The crucial thing was really to move the camera closer to the foreground. This also works great when you are shooting at the beach. As an example, I have this photo of Whitehaven Beach in Australia. Here I didn't even have very interesting light, just the sun high in the sky. But the low perspective created some nice diagonals throughout the frame. And then I also had those 3 leaves, which again provide kind of an anchor point in the foreground. Here's another example. I had the camera a little below knee height on a tripod, which again gives the structures in the sand more importance. I could have gone even lower here to create more dynamic, but in this case I stopped at this height because the pool and the reflection created such a nice harmony with the cloud patterns in the sky. So again, just going low with the camera alone is not enough. You always have to pay close attention to what's happening in the rest of the photo, how the middle ground is affected, and when the right balance between all the elements is reached. To find the right perspective, I usually have my camera in live view and not yet on the tripod, and then I move around, going left and right, up and down, to find the sweet spot for the composition. And only then, when I've found it, I put the camera on the tripod and do the last fine-tuning, which is basically the workflow I used here. So now let's look at an example where moving the camera closer to the ground wouldn't have had the positive effect on the photo I'm usually after. Here you see my setup for a photo I took at Whiskey Bay in Australia a few months ago. I didn't set up the camera close to the ground and instead went with a higher point of view. The reason was that the rocks you see in the photo created some nice repetition in the middle ground, just like little islands in the sand. Had I gone lower, I would have lost the separation between those islands and by this the repetition of elements throughout the frame. So you see, using a low perspective is certainly a great tool to introduce some dynamic into a photo. But it's not always the right tool. There are many more things to take into account when composing a photo, and to learn those it takes time and practice. There's one book though I want to mention which helped me a lot in the beginning to understand what works and what to look for when composing a shot. The book is called The Photographer's Eye by Michael Freeman, and I'll leave a link in the description below. And last but not least, if you like the video and want to see more, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment.